What if I told you there's a pact in Preludes 12 that doesn't follow the courage meta? Orengall has some new mechanics in P12, and it happens to be the perfect pact to pair with the Torrent, one of our new runes. So let's do another updated pact build. The vision for crafting Orengall is a quest reward from the She-Wolf Snared Fable, and Tuvolcani can craft it for you when you get her to bond too. All of Orengall's arcanics have changed a bit since my last Orengall video, so let's take a fresh look at how they work now, starting with Werewalker. Werewalker transfers you into a wolf, allowing you to run faster. This is wonderfully convenient, especially in Koga when you can't use Wevet Seeds to fast travel. While in wolf form, you'll be able to surprise an enemy with a finisher that deals a fixed 1000 damage, instantly killing most mobs. If you walk instead of running while you close in for a kill, you become invisible, making it much easier to get in position for those finishers. This is a great change because you do still need to make sure you're close enough for your bite to connect. Otherwise, you'll chomp the air, causing Werewalker to end. Unfortunately, Werewalker still has some issues. This technically isn't a transformation, even though it feels that way when you use it, because your envoy's body will be left behind, and if it takes any damage at all, Werewalker will end and you'll be transported back to the spot where you cast it. This makes Werewalker almost completely useless in combat, since your envoy will still have aggro and usually either adds or AoE attacks will send you back to your body before you can actually get in a finisher. It's still neat to use as an opener, especially now that taking out enemy healers is much more important, but most bosses are immune to Werewalker finishers, so in situations where you'd most benefit from an initial burst of damage, you can't use it. And your Werewalker wolf now has health and can be killed if it gets aggro. So you're mostly just going to use Werewalker for crossing the map quickly, but even that has its issues because there's no indicator for how long you have left on your wolf form, and if you haven't attacked by the time it ends, you get transported back to where you cast it. Next we have Packhunter, an arcanic that will summon a spirit wolf to fight beside you. You can have a maximum of 2 wolves at a time, and they deal very respectable damage. They also do have health now, but I have no idea how much. We cannot see their health bar, nor can we see how much damage enemies are dealing to them, so I can only guess as to how any of their health mechanics work. Their survival can still be a bit iffy depending on which Agari you're fighting. Fortunately, Howl, Orengall's third arcanic, can now heal your Packhunter wolves. I'm not entirely sure how this heal works. At first I thought it had to be a heal over time based on how long wolves were surviving while Howl is active, but I'm no longer certain on this. Howl could be refreshing their health with every cast, but without any way to see the health numbers, it's impossible to know for sure. Aside from the new heal, Howl also buffs Smite Chance and doubles courage for all allies in range, and briefly charms Odin dogs. Yes, even the big ones. Alright, so now that we know what all the arcanics do, let's talk about the virtue scaling. While Preludes 12 brought changes to most packs that amount to weaker spirit and gray scaling and much stronger courage scaling, Orengall is a stunning exception to this rule. Grace increases the range of your Howl, and while this is the only thing that scales with Grace on Orengall, the scaling is hilariously strong, especially compared to other packs. Here's the range of my Howl with only 4 Grace, and here's the range with 31 Grace. Keep in mind, this is the radius of my Howl. The total area at minimum Grace is enough to keep your wolves in range for a heal on a non-Grace build, and if you want to run a full Grace ranged build, you could play from extremely far away and still be able to top off your wolves' health while they tank for you. Spirit is also unusually strong on Orengall, as it increases the duration of both Werewalker and summoned wolves by roughly 2.4 seconds per point of Spirit. Howl only gets about 10% of that increase, gaining roughly 0.2 of a second per point. You still can't refresh Howl's duration by recasting it, so this arcanic requires a bit of micromanaging on a spirit build. You'll need to wait for the blue glow on your envoy to disappear before you recast Howl, otherwise it will run out when the first Howl ends and you won't have the buff again until your next cooldown is up. In Koga, however, this is not an issue because your cooldowns get so long that it's not possible to get 100% uptime. Instead, you'll want to save it to cast strategically, like to proc Smite at the start of a boss fight or to heal your wolves if they're tanking for you. Unlike every other pact in Preludes 12, Orengall only barely scales with Courage. Courage does increase the strength of Howl's Smite buff, but that scaling is actually pretty weak. At 4 Courage, my Maestro's Smite Chance went from 5% to 13%. At 35 Courage, the Smite Chance went up to 17%. But then when I put enough points in Spirit to hit Maestro's attunement cap and put the rest into Courage, I only went down to 16%. So, the base smite chance from Howl is extremely strong, and while you do get more for having more courage, you'll still be fine putting points into other virtues. It is possible that courage also strengthens the heal that Howl gives to your wolves, but I have not found a reliable way to test this. I haven't noticed any huge difference when running high and low courage builds, so my guess is that either the heal doesn't scale with courage or the scaling is not especially meaningful. Prior to working on this video, I was convinced that wolf damage scaled strongly with courage, but I no longer believe that's true. I spent hours testing wolf damage against Thaw-Tide hunters, thinking that would eliminate most variables, but this turned out to be way more confusing than I expected. Packhunter wolves have several different attack types that do different amounts of damage and stagger, and I could just not be certain that I was comparing the same attacks on each build. Ultimately, I don't think wolf damage scales, but I'm still not completely sure. If it does, the scaling is extremely weak. So, where does that leave us? Well, the most important virtue for Orengall is whatever virtue your weapon is attuned to. Even though we finally have a pact that scales well with Grace and Spirit, the minimum values for all arcanics are plenty comfortable for most gameplay, so there's no real incentive to spend more points on any of them. Instead, you can let your weapon determine where you put your virtue points, and you'll get at least some value for your pact arcanics as well, regardless of which virtue that ends up being. For this video, I'm going to do a spirit build because DE finally gave us a spirit bow. Look, it's so pretty. So let's build Orengall for it. Orengall's unique pact upgrades are Soulbound and Feral. Feral makes Orengall periodically show up to fully kill an enemy, and while this is extremely fun to watch, it's also not terribly useful. You're going to have 1 point in there anyway so that you can get to Akin, because every build needs a maxed out Akin in P12, but it's not worth upgrading Feral any further. Soulbound, on the other hand, is worth using on every build. While the text says it increases melee damage, this actually works for all weapons. This is a good thing and should be how the pact works. I have the same opinion about Tethrin and Fellust. One of the best parts of Soulframe is how you can use any pact with any weapon and any sidearm. That variety is so fun to play with, and my only concern regarding the upcoming virtue rework is how the new system will impact that versatility. There are definitely balance issues between weapon types, but I would rather see those issues resolved with changes to grip types or combat mechanics, not through limiting which weapons are usable with which pacts. For example, the new melee regain mechanic was a much needed buff for melee combat, and the arrow hail damage nerf was definitely needed to balance bows. Those are the sorts of changes I'd like to see more of, and I hope we eventually see Soulbound's description change to embrace buffing all weapon damage. Anyway, Soulbound doesn't give you a ton of damage, but it is a base damage increase, which does add up once you stack on other multipliers. At max rank, it gives you +5 damage for each ally in range, which includes yourself, your wolves, and your sparrow when you summon it. In solo play, this means Soulbound will usually give you 15 extra damage, which I initially scoffed at as a bow user, but Cammy pointed out that on weapons like short blades that have a faster attack speed and lower base damage, those 15 points really do make a difference. It sounds like Soulbound should be extremely strong in co-op with 3 envoys and 6 wolves, but Soulbound caps out at 4 allies including yourself, meaning the most you can get out of it is 20 damage. Even so, more damage is still more, and base damage is especially valuable, so we definitely want to max this out. The range of Soulbound isn't super huge, so melee weapons do still have an advantage here, but it's a very reasonable advantage for them to have. From here, you should max out Sympathy for its extremely strong heal over time, and then put the rest of your upgrades into whichever virtue your weapon is attuned to. On my Spirit build, that leaves me with 1 upgrade point left over, and I'm going to put it into Sapphine's Gift because a little extra range on my Howl will make healing my wolves just a teensy bit easier. For armor, wear the best gear you have. Armor stats aren't super critical in Preludes 12. This is going to change with the virtue rework, so it's not something to fret about at the moment. Just use your best gear. For a talisman, I'm using Orengall's Fang, purely for the vibes. I mean, the virtues are good too, but come on, look at this fit. Since this build focuses entirely on arrow hail, I'm only going to take my spirit to 27 to reach the Maestro's attunement cap. Normally I'd dump all my points into spirit because charge shots scale past the base attack attunement cap, but you don't need that for this torrent build. Instead, I'll put the rest of my virtue points into Grace for more range on my Howls. You can use whatever sidearm you like on this build. It doesn't really matter because, as you'll see shortly, you won't need to use it. And now, my favorite part, the bow build. I love charged shot bow builds, especially with Alka's Breath, but that is sadly not the best way to build a bow for Orengall. Packhunter's wolves can block your arrows, and between that and the way their attacks jostle and knock down enemies, they make it a bit more difficult to hit your shots. The CC from wolves is super helpful in melee combat, but it gets kind of annoying when you perfectly line up a headshot only for Moonmoon to knock your target out of the way at the last second. So instead we'll build for Arrow Hail and the Torrent, but don't worry, I'll save my charge shot build to show you with a different pact. For bow totems, in attack we're going to use the Gnawing for armor strip and the Yielding for a slow. These will not affect the torrent of arrows called by the rune, but we'll be using Arrow Hail to proc smite anyway, so we might as well get some armor strip to make our hail do more damage, and the slow will keep enemies in range of our hails and torrents. In utility, I use the Lookout for cooldown reduction on Howl. Normally I'd use the Spry for base smite chance, but Howl gives you plenty of smite chance without it, so instead the Lookout will give you much better uptime on your Howl, especially in Koga. In defense, I'd recommend either the Scourge or the Yielding. Use whichever one best evens out your armor stats. These are the combat arts I currently use on all my bow builds. The important arts for this torrent build are Fletching to increase the range for your arrow hail, and Rife Knocked to increase the number of arrows in your hail. Rife Knocked does not affect the number of arrows summoned by the torrent, but it's still very useful for your hail. If you don't have enough arts for all these upgrades, those are the two that you should prioritize on this build. Wolf's Eye and Ready Mark can be your last priority since we're not relying on charge shots here, although they are still nice to have when you get enough upgrades. So, about the Torrent. This rune is way too strong. After you pull a smite, every arrow will summon a torrent of arrows, whether it hits a target or not. I'm calling this a torrent and not a hail because its damage works differently from your normal arrow hail. It does not scale with weapon damage, but rather has a fixed damage based on the rank of the rune, and it ignores armor. Bosses only take half of that damage, but it's still plenty given how you can spam light attacks at the ground to rapidly call torrents to that spot. And this isn't even what makes the rune so broken. If you use Arrow Hail while the torrent is active, each arrow in that hail will summon its own torrent. This creates so many arrows it lags my computer, and it caused both of my teammates to crash when I was demonstrating on stream. In fact, the torrent will summon torrents at every arrow, even if those arrows come from a hail that started before the rune activates. So here I am using Hail to proc smite on a Vadagar stag, which strips its armor while I activate my rune, causing torrents to immediately take a quarter of its health while it's effectively frozen by the slow, and then the rest just melts away with one more hail of torrents. So yeah, this rune is absolutely broken, which is really not something I want to say because of how overused that term is, but I think it actually applies in this circumstance. I like the idea of Torrent. A rune that focuses on AoE damage is a perfect complement to the single target power of Alka's Breath, but this is too much. For starters, only successful hits should summon a Torrent, and there definitely needs to be some kind of internal cooldown. Archstorm, now the one called Hurlwind, had a very similar problem with orbiting Flyblades when it first dropped, but that was fixed pretty quickly. Hopefully Torrent gets a similar change very soon, because as much as I love bows, I do want them to be balanced with the rest of Soulframe gameplay. And if you're watching this after the Torrent has already been nerfed, check the pinned comment for any notes about how you might want to adjust your gameplay to accommodate the changes. My guess is that this build will still work quite well even with significant Torrent nerfs, but we'll have to wait and see how DE decides to handle it. In the meanwhile, enjoy melting your targets, if your PC is strong enough to handle it. If you found this video helpful, please toss it a like and subscribe to see more Soulframe content. What's your favorite weapon to use with Orengall? Let me know in the comments, and until next time, happy hunting!